If you walk into a Meta PM interview unprepared, you're done. One bad round, you're locked out for 12 months. I was a group PM at Google and interviewed hundreds of candidates. Most failed not because of a lack of talent, but because they weren't interview ready. With Meta and every other top tech company, the bar is now very, very high. To give you a sense of how this works, usually you'll first go through an initial round of 1 or 2 interviews. This is after your recruiter screen, and then you're going to do 5 or 6 other rounds. So altogether, you're going to do maybe 6 or 7 or 8 different interviews. Each of those interviews, your interviewer is going to give you a score, and the scores range from strong do not hire, leaning do not hire, leaning higher, higher, and strong hire. And in order to move forward, you actually have to receive at least a hire or a strong hire from 1 or more of these interviews. If you just receive leaning higher across the board, chances are you're not going to get the offer. Meta and other top tech companies optimize for a reduction in what's called the false positive. They want to make sure that they don't make a mistake when hiring. In fact, they're ready to say no to the perfect candidate as many times as is necessary just to make sure they never say yes to the wrong candidate. Now that you know that we need those strong hire or higher recommendations, and plenty of them, you know that the bar is very high. The other downside is that if you get a no hire or leaning do not hire, or even if everybody comes back with leaning higher but there's no strong supporter, the answer is going to be no. And if the answer is going to be no, then in the best case, you're going to be asked to take what's called a 12-month cool-off period where you don't apply to Meta or that company where you interviewed for 12 months. Now, this is good in one perspective that you can just come back and try again, but it's bad because you burn a whole year. And since Meta, Google, and other top tech companies pay top of market, you really can't afford to fail these interviews too much if you're going to have a highly financially rewarding product career. If you do extremely poorly, then you may not be asked to come back at all, and you will effectively block your chances of ever interviewing at Meta again. This happens rarely because you really have to receive bad evaluation from a number of interviewers in order to get this, but it is possible. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about the Meta process. First, there's going to be a product sense and an analytical or execution style interview as your first round. Product sense requires the following elements: structured thinking, scoping the problem space, segmentation of your user in a way that makes sense, prioritization so that we focus on the right problems and users, user empathy, that is understanding the pain and problems of those users, solutioning, which means building something that's worth building and actually solves the problem, and finally metrics and go to market if time permits. So one of the first things you want to do is when you're thinking about a product sense question, such as design a parking solution for Google Maps or Apple Maps, or design a product for volunteering for Meta, or design a product around job hunting, or really anything else, you want to do a self-assessment on these areas. For analytical question, there's a few different things to think about. The types of questions that we're dealing with are setting goals and metrics, finding a root cause analysis to a problem, picking between 2 options and explaining your rationale, explaining trade-offs, thinking about counter metrics. Should Netflix invest in a podcast initiative and building out a new feature or a new product around podcasts? This is an analytical execution question because you're thinking about the different goals that Netflix has as a product and company and thinking about whether this particular product line makes sense considering where you're headed. So you're going to consider trade-offs. So for the analytical ones, you want to assess yourself along the lines of setting goals for the business, setting goals for the product, identifying North Star metric, thinking about the user value, thinking about the business value, evaluating between North Star metric, and explaining how you think about trade-offs, and explaining your thinking in general. The third component for Meta or top tech interviews is the behavioral interview, and this involves questions about how you lead, how you align stakeholders, how you manage conflict, how you think about launches, how you think about success, failure, challenges, roadblocks, difficulties, etc. And the things that you want to assess yourself on are brevity, relevance, alignment to values, meta values in this case. There's a few areas you need to think about when assessing your readiness. The first one is the content itself. If you were just to write on these subjects, do you have enough to write about? Do you feel comfortable writing about this or thinking about these issues? And question number 2 is delivery. Do you feel confident and comfortable speaking to these things? The content and the delivery are separate things. And then you add the third component, which is the time limit. With each interview, you've got usually about 45 minutes for the whole thing, which includes introduction and some questions at the end. So you really have about 30-35 minutes for the primary interview to take place. That means there's a strong time component. And again, you want to think about it from the perspective of content first, delivery second, time component third. Besides a self-assessment, of course, you need a calibrated interviewer, someone ideally that has interviewed in the past for these tech companies and has participated in giving hire or do not hire recommendations to actually give you what's called a calibrated assessment, which means tell you what your your score would be, explain why they made that choice, and explain what your gaps are. Here's some common mistakes that I've seen. I've watched all the videos. I know all the frameworks. I'm sure you've watched a lot of videos. I'm sure you've memorized a lot of frameworks, but I don't think I mentioned frameworks as a component that's being evaluated here. So just knowing the frameworks doesn't actually help you pass any of these interviews. Doesn't necessarily help you with the content. Certainly doesn't help you with delivery. It can help you a little bit with the time component. So the idea about the frameworks here, they're useful, but you got to actually internalize them. And don't just watch the videos, actually do these exercises. Get some calibrated help to help you assess and understand where you actually are. The second common mistake that I see, I've got a great design intuition. I can build all sorts of awesome creative solutions. That is great. However, you're not really being evaluated on solutions as much. What you are being evaluated on is the problem definition and the problem that you choose to tackle and why you choose to tackle and how you think about it, much more so than the solution itself. The third mistake that I've seen, pretty common. I've been building products for 10 years. I think I can pass this interview. This one hurts the most. Yes, it will help you to do better in the interviews, to actually know how to develop products in real life and have a lot of experience with it, but the skill set is a little bit different, and you cannot just make up for your lack of interviewing skills with your profound product management experience. And knowing both will make you a much better interviewer than someone who's just practicing interviews. But if you don't know how to interview, even if you have a great product management background, you're very likely to fail the interviews themselves. And the fourth common one that I get is, got a bunch of offers 4 or 5 years ago for PM roles. I think I've got this. Unfortunately, the economic reality has changed. Pretty much anyone with the title product manager could get an offer in 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic and post-pandemic boom of the product career. That's not the case anymore. Competition is extremely high. And the final case I get is that this role is perfect for me. They're exactly hiring for someone with my background. It does not matter, because you have to pass a general interview readiness bar to actually work at Meta and other top tech companies. If you get a no hire recommendation, you're not joining the company. A lot of these preparation frameworks and guidelines are readily available online, including this very video, but you need to do the work and you need to be assessed by a calibrated interviewer to actually understand what the gaps are so that you can meaningfully move forward. Most strong PM candidates need at least 3 to 6 weeks of dedicated prep on this, on just the interview portion, in order to make significant progress in their weak areas, in order to get to that higher state. If your self-assessment showed that you're not quite there, or you've done some calibrated mock interviews or had someone review your write-ups and you can see where the gaps are and you see that you're not quite there, what do you do? I recommend you reschedule if you have not already. A lot of folks reach out to us and say, we've got an interview in a week with Meta. Can you help? A lot of time the answer is, I'd love to, but realistically, it's probably going to take longer than that to actually meaningfully change your likelihood of getting a strong hire recommendation. Don't do the interview just because you want to get it over with. Remember, there's a 12-month cooldown period, and you don't want to wait 12 months to get your shot again. So reschedule. You can even just tell your recruiter the truth. Hey, I'd love to show up more prepared. I need another 2, 3, 4 weeks. Can we reschedule this to next month, same time? Don't be afraid to do this. It is very unlikely that you will actually get a pass in the interview if your self-assessment or your calibrated assessments are not where they need to be. Just follow what we've been talking about. First, work on your content. So just write it out. Get a feel for answering these questions. Imagine that you're solving a puzzle each time. Just answer to the best of your ability: product design, execution, behavioral. Then when you're comfortable and confident with the content of it, start practicing. Do recordings of yourself and just speak freely, just to get the feel for how you're actually communicating, where the gaps are, what unnecessary words you're using, when you're repeating ideas too much. Just start to identify these patterns and improve them over time. And then add the time component. Don't restrict yourself in that part 2, but in part 3, put a restriction that you can only speak for 5 minutes, and you're only talking about this subsection of the interview. You're only talking about segmentation for 5 minutes. You're only talking about problem framing for 4 minutes. You're only sharing this part of your behavioral story 3 minutes, as if you're practicing for a sports event. And then the final step would be to get a calibrated coach to actually assess your performance in these key areas. They can give you feedback of where the gaps actually are. And if you'd like to partner with us to prep for your upcoming Meta or other top tech interview, use the link in the description to schedule a call with our team.